Paramahansa Yogananda was a yogi who had a profound spiritual understanding. He was connected to the Sanatana Dharma of India as well as the Kriya Yoga path, which is an old practice. However, within his luminous teachings, one can detect a gentle resonance, a harmony that is both subtle and unmistakable with the fundamental principles of Buddhism. Yogananda's perspective of the nature of suffering, the permanence of the world, and the journey toward liberation matches many Buddhist truths, honed through the lens of yogi realization. Despite the fact that he never claimed to be a Buddhist, Yogananda's knowledge of these topics is influenced by Buddhism. It was through the lineage of renowned Indian sages such as Lahiri Mahasaya, Sri Yukteswar, and the immortal Mahavata Babaji that Yogananda received his educational and spiritual training. He introduced a practical approach to self-realization to the Western world, one that places an emphasis on direct inner experience rather than dogma. His teachings were not intended to compete with others' religious beliefs. Rather, they were intended to increase one's grasp of truth, regardless of whether one was a Buddhist, Hindu, or Christian. Frequently, he asserted that truth is universal. The law of karma, the cycles of reincarnation, and the illusion of the ego are all fundamental issues in Buddhist theory, and Yogananda discusses all three of these topics in his landmark work, Autobiography of a Yogi. The ceaseless flux of the material world, the restless turning of desire and aversion, and the requirement for inner stillness are all things that he highlights in his discourse. Both yoga and Buddhism are able to accommodate his ideas and notions. In contrast, Yogananda brings something that is bright to the table, and that is the soul. On the other hand, Yogananda says that the soul is a spark of God that is eternal and blissful, in contrast to the traditional Buddhist practice of declining to acknowledge the presence of a permanent soul, anatta. However, he claims that this soul eventually becomes enmeshed in Maya, which is the illusion of being distinct. The lyrical bridge that connects the various traditions can be found here. Yogananda describes the soul as formless consciousness that is free from ego but brilliant with divine personality. This is in contrast to Buddhism, which emphasizes the importance of avoiding attachment to fixed self. Both fruits meet in the inner laboratory of meditation, where the both converge. Yogananda taught that a devout can attain a transcendent condition beyond cognition by practicing profound meditation, particularly Kriya Yoga. This allows the devotee to steady the breath, withdraw the senses, and enter a state of mindfulness. This technique is quite similar to the Buddhist practice of Vipassana or Zen Zazen, in which one learns to study the mind and let go of attachments to negative thoughts and feelings. The ultimate objective of a yogi or a monk is to achieve freedom from suffering, the cessation of illusion, and union with the real. However, Yogananda did not only take Buddhist ideas and traditions. It was respected by him. During his public speeches, he lauded the Buddha as a savior of the world, a son of India who resigned his royal position in order to pursue truthfully. It was in the life of the Buddha that he recognized the same divine drama that had been performed out by Krishna, Christ, and other beings who had realized God. His perspective is that the light of God can be seen through a variety of names. Being compassionate was the driving force behind Yogananda's admiration for Buddhism. Like the Buddha, he viewed suffering not as a kind of punishment, but rather as a means of education. Pain, he remarked, is what reawakens the soul. To advance on a spiritual level, we need to go beyond our preferences and aversions, as well as our desires and our anxieties. This detachment is not the result of a lack of hurt, but rather of love. We're able to awake the higher self, also known as the Atman, which is not aware of separation when we separate from the lower self. In this way, Yogananda's path might be described as both scientific and mystical. He never asked his students to have an unquestioning faith in him. During the stillness of their individual meditation, he extended an invitation to them to experiment with the truth. Similar to the Buddha, he did not point to himself, but rather to the process, which is to concentrate, experience, and have a realization. The first leg of our journey has provided us with a look into the ways in which Yogananda's vision and the teachings of Buddhism share a common thread. In spite of the fact that they approach from different directions, they both lead inward to the same silent center, to the same limitless tranquility. In the second part of this series, we will investigate how Yogananda saw pain, desire, and the reason for reincarnation, which are all important topics in which his perspectives are similar to those of the Enlightened one. In order to comprehend the relationship between Yogananda and Buddhist thinking, it is necessary to delve into the topic of suffering, which was the theme that defined the Buddha's personal awakening. It is said in the First Noble Truth that life in its typical form is dukkha, which might be translated as discomfort, impermanence, and dissatisfaction. The intrinsic sorrow that is part of the human condition was a topic that Yogananda frequently discussed. Yogananda, on the other hand, offered divine remembrance, in contrast to Buddhism, which offered a path of detachment and mindfulness. He emphasized that the fundamental reason for suffering is not merely desire for something or a lack of knowledge. Rather, it's a forgetfulness of our divine nature. According to what he explained, you do not need to acquire God. You are already in possession of Him. You are tasked with remembering them. A little change like this completely alters the journey. To the Buddhist, liberation is the end of desire. To Yogananda, liberation is the fulfillment of divine love, which is a love that puts an end to all lesser desires by replacing them with happiness. This is where the great beauty of synthesis emerges. As a path to achieve nirvana, the Buddha placed an emphasis on non-attachment and awareness. On the other hand, Yogananda placed an emphasis on devotion and connecting with infinite inside oneself. There are two paths that lead to the cessation of pain, but they're slightly different approaches. Both of these paths, however, are neither icy or abstract. Each one stimulates the heart. For his followers, Yogananda did not request that they flee from life. He requested that they cleanse it. The goal is to transform the battle into a victory of the soul. Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, and Samadhi are the 8 components that make up the Eightfold Path of Yoga, which Yogananda taught in the same way that Buddha taught the Eightfold Path. As the seeker progresses through the stages, the layers of illusions are gradually removed and are brought into contact with the immortal self. In each of these 2 ideologies, desire is regarded as a 5th. However, it does not deliver on its promise of fulfillment. In his description of desire, Yogananda referred to it as a rope that ties the soul to body consciousness. In addition, he did not reject desire with judgment, but rather with clarity, much like the Buddha did. It's difficult to satisfy every need, but the true route is to transcend desire and discover happiness inside oneself to do this. In this sense, Yogananda and the Buddha regarded emancipation not as an ideal that was far off in the future, but rather as something that was attainable right now. By not waiting for grace, not by merely amassing good karma, but rather by reawakening the light that we already possess within ourselves. Both of them pointed to the breath as the bridge between the 2. Breath awareness was the first step toward gaining insight, according to the Buddha. Controlling one's breath through the practice of Kriya Yoga was the impetus for Yogananda's work. The breath is considered holy in each of these religions. It is the gateway through which the mind is able to disintegrate. Time is halted and the soul communicates with eternity. In addition, Yogananda reiterated the Buddhist concept of samsara, which refers to the never-ending cycle of birth and death. On the other hand, he portrayed it as the dream of God, a dream in which the soul will sink, forget itself, and then have to wake up. He exhorted those who were seeking not to be afraid of death, but to triumph over it by the realization of God. In order to transcend the ego and become consciously one with infinite, it's necessary to die while they are still alive. They are silent, which is maybe the most attractive aspect of their overlap. Noble stillness was highlighted as a means of attaining enlightenment in the teachings of Buddha. The word silence is the altar of spirit, also spoken by Yogananda. In the stillness, the soul recalls its place of origin. When there is silence, God speaks. And the third and final part of the discussion, we will investigate Yogananda's understanding of enlightenment and to what extent it is connected to the Buddhist concept of nirvana. We shall investigate his perspective on the ego, the void, and divine unity, and we'll find out how both fruits contribute to the dissolution of the illusion of separateness and the restoration of the truth that was never lost. When it comes to enlightenment, both Yogananda and the Buddha talk of freedom. Nevertheless, the meaning that they use to describe freedom reveals subtle and deep contrasts between them. Enlightenment, as defined by Buddha, is nirvana, which is the cessation of suffering. the extinguishing of the flame of desire, and the blowing out of the delusion that the ego has created regarding itself. Self-realization is what Yogananda means when he talks about it. It's becoming aware of the everlasting essence of the soul and reuniting it with the spirit. But are these really that dissimilar? Yogananda frequently referred to God as an ever-present, ever-conscious, and ever-improving source of happiness. When one reaches samadhi, the highest possible state of yogi practice, they're able to directly experience this ecstasy. Not only is it not a void, but it's also not a complete and utter cessation. Love, light, and unity are all exploding out of this explosion. Even when the ego is destroyed, what is left behind is not nothingness. Rather, this is everything. It dawns on them that they are not the drop, but rather the ocean. A comparable proliferation can be found in Buddhism, particularly in the Mahayana schools of this religion. A concept known as sunyata, which translates to emptiness, is not simply nothingness. Rather, it is the limitless potential from which all forms originate. The feeling of compassion blossoms in that limitless space. Yogananda would be in agreement. He concluded by saying, "When the I shall die, then shall I know who I am. Who am I?" Following the loss of the ego, the soul comes to the realization that it was never distinct from God. Both of the instructors cautioned their students to avoid falling into the mental traps. The mind has the ability to dissect, but it cannot instill freedom. Only first-hand experience can do that. Because of this, both religions place an emphasis on meditation, not as a means of escape, but rather as a gateway. It's a method for destroying the cloak of duality. The idea that God is concealed by the interplay of opposites, such as happiness and sadness, light and darkness, was one of the most novel concepts that Yogananda was able to convey. Because of the drama, the soul is so captivated that it forgets who it is. To achieve enlightenment, one must not turn away from the word, but rather see through it, recognizing the origin of form rather than rejecting its existence. In contrast to the austerity that can be found in certain interpretation of Buddhism, Yogananda delivers a brilliant delight, because it's a reunion with the beloved. His enlightenment is filled with joy. As a matter of fact, the illusion of separateness is dispelled with any road is pursued with sincerity. There's no difference in the end result, whether it is referred to as nirvana or self-realization, freedom, peace, and happiness. Therefore, we're going back to the beginning. Despite the fact that Yogananda was a yogi, he possessed the very essence of the Buddha's wisdom inside him. He imparted the knowledge of devotion by detachment, joy through quiet, and love without attachment. Due to the fact that he had personally experienced the everlasting truths, he respected all the ways that led to the truth. We observe not a confrontation, but rather a conversation taking place between Yogananda and Buddhism. in the dance that they exchange. Harmonies, not polar opposites, are what we need. There are two ways, two voices, and it's silent. And in that stillness, the soul recalls what it has always known, that it is one with everything, and that love is the profound and fearless, is the most authentic form of emancipation of all.